by seeking to remove us from the ECHR, he potentially puts British service people at greater risk than he does offer them protection.
The lead appellant in that case, before he became a Member of Parliament, was one Keir Starmer QC. The Minister for Veterans and People got into some trouble over this, because when we highlighted this in the Commons, she was adamant that he had not been working for China. Unfortunately for the Minister, we had the court records from the House of Lords, which showed very clearly that Keir Starmer, as he then was the lead appellant appointed and instructed, that word is used in the records, by Phil Shiner's law firm, Public Interest Lawyers. The Minister for Veterans subsequently had to come to the Commons in February and go through the embarrassment of having to correct the record and admit that our version of events, as explained to the Commons, was true. So several years after losing in the House of Lords, he took the case to the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. And to be clear, Keir Starmer was not acting in that action. China won, so the Strasbourg court ruled that the ECHR would then apply to any theatre in which British Armed Forces personnel were serving. Through that judgment, they effectively created an industry that China then massively exploited. He brought literally hundreds of cases against current and past British Armed Forces personnel. Many of the cases were funded by British taxpayers through legal aid and were completely and utterly fabricated for money. It was the use of the ECHR that allowed him to do that. In other debates in the chamber, we have heard senior ministers, including the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, say that there is no such thing as a vexatious prosecution. Self-evidently, there must be, because otherwise why was China struck off and convicted of fraud by a court of law? There can be, in fact there were, hundreds of vexatious prosecutions against British military personnel. It was, for the record, Johnny Mercer, a former member of this House, when he served on the Defence Committee some years ago, who led a subcommittee investigation into this issue. Its very powerful report helped to bring China to book, no doubt saving the taxpayer a lot more money and leading to China's career ending in disgrace. But to come to the present day, what if there were a ceasefire in Ukraine? Let us posit a situation in which, under the auspices of the coalition of the willing, British service personnel were deployed to Ukraine. If by some happenstance they became involved in a firefight with Russian troops, who perhaps had incurred across the line of ceasefire, who is to say that years, maybe decades later, those personnel will not end up in a court of law for obeying what they believed to be perfectly legitimate orders, but was subsequently second-guessed by a human rights lawyer literally decades on, perhaps with Russian assistance. In short, we cannot allow this government's obsession with human rights to put our armed forces at risk, either now, in the future, or indeed historically, in a moment, and potentially force them to fight ruthless opponents with one arm tied behind their back. This issue is not going to go away, and at some point the government, be it through the Northern Ireland Troubles Bill or some other mechanism, will be forced to address it. The purpose of these new clauses is to force them to address it today.
I am grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. If I might just quote a few words from the honourable member for Huntingdon, who spoke just a couple of months ago in this chamber. He said at the time, "This month marked 20 years since I returned from serving on Operation Telic 7 in Iraq. While I was there, we patrolled Basra and snatched Land Rovers, and 34 British soldiers died in snatched Land Rovers. They were called mobile coffins and suicide wagons for a reason. In 2006, it was highlighted to the government that those vehicles were unsuitable, and it was not until years later that they were replaced. It wasn't the ECHR that put British soldiers' lives at risk in Iraq, but it was the ECHR that provided the legal basis for the families of those victims to seek justice. I think the gentleman is looking through the wrong end of the telescope on this one, and that by seeking by seeking to remove us from the ECHR, he potentially puts British service people at greater risk than he does offer them protection.